folks, I'm speaking to you from quarantine. There's nothing wrong with me, but I've been in self-isolation effectively under house arrest for a couple of weeks now. And as a law-abiding citizen, obviously I obey the law. But that is the nature of society now. As we can see, it's Halloween, but I'm here today to talk to you about the US presidential election, which is only a few days away now, a couple of days away now, but it's tremendously important for the whole world. When judging or evaluating Trump and his record, you have to remember one important factor that has to be constantly borne in mind. Trump is one man. He has to govern with and through the Republican Party, and when he was elected in 2016, he was hated by most of the Republican establishment and hierarchy. The Republican Party was dominated by neocons who are committed globalists, and to rule, he needed them, or some of them at least, on side to get his legislation through. All presidents have to govern through the Senate and the House of Representatives and through the 50 states that all have their own governors, some Republican, some Democrat, and a lot of power still resides with the state. When Trump was elected, as I said, a lot of the Republican congressmen and governors were, let's say, unhelpful. When a president wants to appoint key ministers to his cabinet, such as the Secretary of State, which is the Foreign Minister, or the Secretary of Defense, they have to be approved by the Senate also. Most senior positions must be confirmed in that way, which is why Trump was shackled or lumbered with neocons from one degree or another, as he had to choose from a limited pool that would be approved by the Senate Republicans. It's as simple as that, really. And key members of his cabinet, therefore, didn't share his worldview. They wanted regime change and more American troops on the ground in the Middle East, for example, in Syria and in Afghanistan. They didn't want peace with North Korea and wanted tension with Russia. That's why Trump has had to change his cabinet so often. They wanted to implement their policy and not the president's policy. And when they were replaced, they inevitably slagged him off like little bitches. People like Mad Dog, the inappropriately named Mad Dog Mattis, who was the defence minister, got replaced. Tillerson, Secretary of State, got replaced. John Bolton, National Security Advisor, got replaced. Trump isn't a system man, he isn't a politician, which is his strength. Anyway, these difficulties mean that criticism of Trump any criticism there's been of Trump has been based on totally unrealistic expectations of what he could achieve in his first term. Now let's turn to Trump's achievements. One of the main features of his first campaign in 2016 was his pledge to build a wall to stop illegal immigration from Mexico and to stop drug cartels and criminal gangs that came in with that element of human trafficking. There was that campaign slogan, "Build the wall, build the wall." Well, he has built some of the wall, but it needs to be paid for. And to do that, he needs the House of Representatives to vote for the budget to pay for them, to provide the money. And that's controlled by the Democrats. He had a big standoff in 2019 over the financing of the wall. Actually, to be fair, in his first 2 years, the House was controlled by Republicans. They had midterm elections in 2018 that the Democrats won narrowly. The opposition parties all the way in the midterms. But in those first 2 years, when the Republicans controlled the House of Representatives, that was when they weren't very reliable to him for the reasons which I've already explained. So the funding of the wall has been a big issue. Nevertheless, he's built an extra 200 miles, some of which has been refurbishing the previous fence, which was in a dilapidated state. And he's improved the border patrol officers teams, which are quite unlike our own border force. They do actually keep out illegal immigrants in America. There's a limit to what he could have done over the wall in his first term, but he's made a good start. On immigration as a whole, You may remember that there was a migrant convoy in 2018 that came from Central America, from down in Honduras and El Salvador, that was trying it on basically to moral blackmail against the United States. This convoy of migrants drove all the way up through Mexico with a lot of media attention to try and force Trump's hand. But he stood firm. He deployed 5,000 troops on the border and this convoy didn't get through. That's a lesson for our government, that if you stand firm, these convoys don't repeat themselves. They try it on and then they don't come again if they don't get in. There's also the travel ban that was quite well known. He introduced that via an executive order that didn't need congressional approval. It was a number of countries were on this travel ban that were regarded as terrorist havens. Nearly all happened to be Muslim countries. And so by bringing in this travel ban, he severely restricted the number of so-called refugees who tried to get into the United States without proper paperwork. So on immigration, he's done a pretty decent job. On foreign policy, there's been no more foreign wars, no more deployment of US troops overseas. Hillary Clinton, his opponent in 2016, was eager to send troops to numerous conflicts and to get involved in bloodbath after bloodbath. Joe Biden would do the same. The residual neocons that Trump was lumbered with, that I've mentioned already, wanted intervention in Syria, for example. Trump has avoided that. There have been a few instances, for example, soon after he was inaugurated, in April 2017, US jets bombed an airfield in Syria, and again in April 2018 they bombed some other facilities. In both instances it was after there was alleged chemical attacks. You heard wails, shamefully, also from people on our side who had been supportive at one point of Trump, saying he had sold out to the neocons with these raids. But these strikes were actually no more than gigantic firework displays with no real damage, no casualties, and the Syrians and Russians had been warned about it beforehand. These raids were carried out to keep the hawks happy without actually doing any real harm. A similar thing happened with the drone strike in January 2020, earlier this year, which took out the Iranian General Soleimani and his immediate entourage at Baghdad airport. Soleimani was a known sponsor of Islamic terror, and this surgical strike resulted in no other collateral damage. Afterwards, Iran mouthed off a bit, but did nothing. There was no plan for regime change. Trump doesn't believe in regime change or in boots on the ground. There was never any prospect of invasion or of a third world war, as some excitable idiots claimed at the time. It was a shot across Iran's bow. He taught them a severe lesson. Trump understands that they are, as the saying goes, either at your feet or at your throat. They only respect strength. Trump also recognised Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. This is another act that predictably upset the usual suspects. But if the Jews and Israel are such a powerful lobby, how is it that it took until Trump for the United States to recognise Jerusalem as the capital of Israel? And how come he took such criticism for this from the globalist elites, who are supposedly mere ciphers of the Jews? Actually, it was a bold and wise geopolitical move. It showed that he is steadfast and that there'll be no backsliding to support the Palestinians or Islam over Israel. He provided certainty. Again, that is what the countries in that region actually respect. They are, as I said earlier, either at your feet or at your throat. It's a wise geopolitical move, and it directly facilitated the recent peace accords between the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and the Sudan with Israel. No one thought that these agreements with Muslim states and Israel were possible, but it's bringing peace and stability to a volatile region, and that can only be good and in everybody's interests. On opposing globalism, which is perhaps the most important challenge facing Trump, with the most far-reaching consequences, he has done particularly well. Trump pulled out of the Paris climate change agreement, which was a big slap in the face for the globalists who were using the misleading nonsense about man-made climate change as a power grab on the West to exert control over our lives while leaving the real polluters in China and India to carry on as before. Trump has enthusiastically promoted fracking and energy independence, which has brought down the price of fuel for everyone, including us. Trump announced that the US will stop funding the World Health Organization, which is a corrupt body that totally failed the world over the coronavirus pandemic and is in the pockets of China and Bill Gates. He renegotiated the NAFTA deal, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which benefited Mexico and Canada at the expense of the United States. It's like a proto-EU. He totally renegotiated that to terms more favourable to the United States. Trump's response to the coronavirus outbreak has also put him out of step with the global elites. He insists in calling it what it is, the China virus. He has been upbeat and positive instead of depressive in his tone. He is again constrained from probably doing what his instinct tells him to do to avoid a lockdown while ring fencing the vulnerable. As I've emphasised, he does not operate in a vacuum, and the bulk of the response in America is devolved down to the state level. So again, his hands have been largely tied. It is also, in my opinion, very likely that the magnitude of the China virus pandemic has been deliberately magnified to unseat Trump, to undo the economic advances made in the United States under his administration. As I said, he's the biggest thorn in the side of the global elites who want to, as they call it, build back better with the Great Reset. To do that, they need him out of the way. He is the leader of the biggest worldwide economy, and he is the enemy of globalism. But his response to the pandemic has resulted in the US economy shrinking less than any other developed country, and it is growing quickest out of it than any other developed country. And I suspect that the whole worldwide China virus pandemic will quieten down magically after the US election, whatever the outcome. I have mentioned at some length the unrealistic expectations that some people had about what Trump could achieve in his first term and the internal Republican opposition to him. If he wins a second term, this will be very different. There is now very much less internal Republican opposition. Nearly all the Republican congressmen and governors support what he's doing because he's been successful and because he's overwhelmingly popular amongst the grassroots. They can see that his support base love him, and they have effectively fallen into line to keep their jobs. So the future, if he wins, looks very bright. Now on to the current United States election, which is only a couple of days away now, although the result may take longer to declare due to a large number of postal votes, which, as we know in this country, are very often dodgy. One excellent outcome already is that Trump has radicalised huge swathes of the American opinion, not least because he has provoked the opposition into dropping all pretense at subjectivity. This has been most clearly seen by the response of the US mainstream media and social media companies to the Hunter Biden scandal. Hunter Biden, the son of the Democratic challenger for President Joe Biden, has been exposed for going around the Ukraine, Russia, Kazakhstan and China, collecting money for bogus company directorships to fund the Biden family with Joe Biden at its head. The Chinese Communist Party has been directly buying influence in the US government. There's a massive evidence but the mainstream and social media companies are blatantly covering it up, which is of course totally different to how they approached a succession of proven bogus claims about Trump. The contrast in behaviour is not lost on millions of people, and not just in the US. This awakening has been very positive. The polls show Biden ahead, although the gap is closing. Yet Biden's rallies are pitifully small compared to Trump's bigger tendencies. And when they survey Trump rally attendees, they find that a lot are either switching from the Democrats or are first-time voters. However, a lot of Trump supporters wouldn't give pollsters an honest answer if they're asked who they're voting for, because they don't trust them. The polls are also likely to be deliberately skewed to demoralise Trump supporters into thinking that the election is a foregone conclusion and that it's lost, so don't bother turning out to vote. Which is why actually Trump is holding these big, enthusiastic, upbeat rallies everywhere to change the mood. Interestingly, surveys show that African Americans and Hispanics are supporting Trump in bigger numbers than the Republicans have ever seen before. Early voting patterns show that the Republicans are outvoting Democrats in many places, when usually Democrats vote early and Republicans tend to vote on the day, which is this Tuesday, by the way. In the US, you can choose to register as a Republican or a Democrat, and that's how you can tell how this early voting is going. A lot of the Democrats also been put into fear and panic over the China virus stories. They believe the mainstream media more, or the scare stories, and so they tend to be voting by post. The methods of postal voting varies from state to state, but quite a lot of checks are made, and a lot of postal votes are always rejected because they're fraudulent, and so it's open to corrupt practices, as in this country obviously, and so a lot of these Democrat votes will be discounted anyway, apart from in California, which is where they've been handing them out willy-nilly. But California is a foregone conclusion, will go Democrat, everyone knows that, and so they could get 1 billion, frankly, there, and it wouldn't make any difference. If Biden wins, it'll be a disaster for America and a disaster for the world. He'll be pro-China. They've bought him and his family already. China is the biggest existential threat to the West. The other existential threat is Islam, and the Democrats and Biden are soft on them as well. Biden's running mate is the left-wing radical Kamala Harris. Given Biden's declining health and age, there's a very good chance she will take over halfway through if he wins. Biden would not give us a good trade deal. He would end fracking and would put up oil prices. He'd phase out fossil fuels and cause huge increases in energy costs. He would sign up to the Paris Climate Change Agreement and would push that agenda forcefully, destroying Western economies and bringing us even more under the control of the global elites, which is what it's all about. He would engage in wars around the Middle East to bring about regime change, causing instability and more refugees. The media and tech companies would be given the green light to control every aspect of our lives. The freedom of the world is at stake here. I don't know what the result will be on Tuesday night or whenever it's declared. There are a lot of indicators that suggest Trump will win, but who knows? However, everyone who values freedom and who wants to defend Western civilization must pray for a Trump victory. Thank you. Please subscribe and share.